started with Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's remarks slamming pro-Israel groups and politicians, labeling them as, quote, pushing for allegiance to a foreign country. Following that came plans for a House resolution condemning anti-Semitism. But then came some internal backlash from some big-name Democrats that Omar was the one being attacked. In the middle of all of this is Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who will be speaking any moment now with reporters, and we're going to bring that to you live when she addresses this. So what now? We're going to have to wait to hear from the speaker herself, but let's go to CNN's Sunlen Serfati. She's on Capitol Hill and has been covering this twists and turns on this issue right now. Sunlen, where do things stand?
Yeah, so many twists and turns for sure, Kate. As of now, we, according to Democratic aides, believe that there will be a vote at some point today on this final resolution, this anti-Semitic resolution. Now, the final text of that resolution has not been released yet, to consternation of many aides and members up here on Capitol Hill, that they have not been able to read what exactly is in that resolution. And as we've been reporting over the last 48 hours, that's the important part here. There's been a lot of concern over what exactly the resolution says. At first, there was a draft of the resolution, of course, anti-Semitism resolution. A lot of members up here, even though the resolution did not name Ilhan Omar by name, they felt that she was unfairly singled out by the direction and the tone of the resolution. So a lot of members up here pushing it for to be more expansive, include anti-Muslim bias language, include some other language. Now, we don't know exactly what is going to be in that resolution. I certainly believe we'll hear more from Nancy Pelosi coming up in just a few minutes, but we did hear from the Majority Whip, Steny Hoyer. He says that the resolution will not name Ilhan Omar by name. It will condemn all forms of hate. He says the message will be, we are against bigotry, we are against prejudice, and against hate. But again, still no final form of that resolution, but they are barreling towards a vote at some point later today. So, Kate, the thing to watch will be, how does this go over within the Democratic caucus? There has been many different messages coming from many folks.
And Sunlen, there has been some pushback even from Nancy Pelosi on how big of a squabble, conflict, debate, fight this has been internally and spilled out publicly.
That's right. She has attempted to downplay the internal tension within her caucus, but from sources I've talked to and members themselves, it seemed that this was quite a flashpoint yesterday up here on Capitol Hill. Democrats huddled on this. This was a major point of contention. Sources described to me as a messy debate going on. A lot of concern coming from Democratic colleagues, some of those allies of Ilhan Omar, and others wanting to push for a more forceful resolution for her. So this is a messy debate. I think Nancy Pelosi clearly wants to put this behind her, and that's why they're pushing to have this vote later today without members having the actual resolution yet.
I will say, it's always important what the Speaker of the House has to say, but what she says in this news conference with reporters is going to be very important for everyone to hear, including even members of her own party, and kind of what the next steps are. We're going to bring that to you when she addresses this coming up. Sunlen, great to see you. Thank you. So this morning there are also new questions over Michael Cohen's testimony to Congress and whether he lied again. Here's the latest version, according to Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis. At one point early last year, Michael Cohen did direct his attorney to discuss a possible pardon with President Trump's legal team. But Lanny Davis also says that does not contradict his testimony to Congress last week when he said this.
I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump.
Can both be true? CNN's Manu Raju is on Capitol Hill as well, following this. Manu, what are you hearing?
Yeah, Lanny Davis is trying to make the argument about the timing of that statement. He's saying it's accurate because he's referring to a period after Michael Cohen's attorneys left what's known as a joint defense agreement, or discussed an agreement between Trump's attorneys and Michael Cohen's attorneys. After he left that period, he didn't seek a pardon. Well, when he was a part of that agreement, he certainly did. At least he directed his attorney to discuss the topic of a pardon. That's what Lanny Davis is acknowledging. He said this in a statement. Lanny Davis did. During that time period, he directed his attorney to explore possibilities of a pardon at one point with Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani, as well as other lawyers advising President Trump. But after July 2nd, 2018, Mr. Cohen authorized me as a new lawyer to say publicly Mr. Cohen would never accept a pardon from President Trump. even if offered. That continues to be the case. Now, I can tell you this explanation is not satisfying Republicans, including the Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr, who met with Michael Cohen during his testimony last week. Said to his in a private testimony, but he said that it appears his public statements are contradictory. He said this, Richard Burr did, Lanny and Michael Cohen have a history of not necessarily making factual statements. They're the ones that have to clear that up. This is a guy who has already lied to Congress. With every interview he does, he's susceptible to forgetting what he said in the past. Not a good situation. Did lie, should suffer the consequences. So clearly the Republicans going after Michael Cohen's credibility still in light of these statements. Democrats yet to react to this. We'll see what they have to say. But nevertheless, some clarification that Cohen's team has to do after the very categorical statement that Michael Cohen made in that public setting last week. Kate.
And such a strange issue to be like splitting hairs on. This is you would think this is not where they want to be having to offer clarifications on this one. Manu, let's see what comes. I'm really interested to hear what Democrats have to say when you see that. Appreciate it. Joining me right now is CNN chief political correspondent Dana Bash for much more on this. Dana, you talked to the president's attorney last night. Mm-hmm. What does Rudy Giuliani say about this pardon issue with Michael Cohen?
Well, he insists that he never offered anybody on behalf of the president or never left open the possibility of immediately promising a pardon to anybody. He said that that is true for Michael Cohen, for Paul Manafort, for George Papadopoulos, and others who are in a position where they are either potentially or are going to jail and could use a presidential pardon. Now, he did leave out the notion that people have come to him to talk to him and other members of the president's legal team about pardons. So it's murky. Giuliani says that he would love to tell the specifics about what happened, but he says Michael Cohen has not released them from, he's not waived the attorney-client privilege. So he's bound by that still. He can't speak about it. But more broadly, Kate, I think what you just got from Manu is really, really important. And that is that this is a witness in Michael Cohen who was already who already had credibility issues since he's going to jail in part for lying to Congress in the first place. And despite the fact that his now lawyer, Lanny Davis, is trying very hard to clean up this issue about pardoning, as you played at the very beginning of this segment, Cohen said very explicitly, I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon for President Trump. Never is not before or after a joint defense agreement that he had with the president
dissolved. Well, and that's the thing, Dana, because while legally accurate maybe, it's telling the whole truth when it comes to common sense that this really gets to. But, Dan, I got to jump in. We got to jump over to the House, back to Capitol Hill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is speaking right now. Let's listen.
People, although I don't believe it was intended in any anti-Semitic way. But the fact is, if that's how it was interpreted, we have to remove all doubt, as we have done over and over again. We're working now on a resolution. We'll see when we bring it to the floor. That will, again, speak out against anti-Semitism, anti-Islamophobia, anti-white supremacy in all the forms that it takes, that our country has no place for this. But on anti-Semitism, we voted a resolution on that just recently. When I was a week and a half ago or so, at the Munich conference and then in Brussels for the NATO meetings, at every meeting, at every level, at the highest levels, our delegation impressed upon our European allies the importance of fighting anti-Semitism in our countries. This is well before the Elon statement that emerged this weekend. But when it did, it was important for me to speak to the member first before we would proceed. She was in Africa. After I spoke to her, members had different tacks they wanted to take, some their individual statements, some thinking we should have a resolution. I thought the resolution should be enlarge the issue to anti-Semitism, anti-Islamophobia, et cetera, anti-white supremacist. And that it should not mention her name, and that's what we're working on, something that is one resolution addressing these forms of hatred, not mentioning her name, because it's not about her, it's about these forms of hatred, these isms.
To apologize? She hasn't apologized. Does she need to apologize?
Well, she may need to explain that she did not. It's up to her to explain, but I do not believe that she understood the full weight of the words. As I say, when you're an advocate out there, as I was, so I appreciate all the enthusiasm that comes into our Congress. I've told you that before. That was me pushing a stroller and carrying those signs. So I understand how advocates come in with their enthusiasms. But when you cross that threshold into Congress, your words weigh much more than when you're shouting at somebody outside. And I feel confident that her words were not based on any anti-Semitic attitude, but that she didn't have a full appreciation of how they landed on other people, where these words have a history and a cultural impact that may have been unknown to her.
Madam Speaker, thank you. And to that end, I know...
Did I call on him? Did you hear me call on him?
You sure looked at me, so that's right. Thank you.
Does that count? Okay,
No,
go ahead.
But thank you. There was concern about motions to recommit that your side has had, and I know how important HR 1 was to your side, and that if you didn't address this right away, that could be the motion to recommit and try to undercut what happened with the firearms bill last week and so on and so forth. So is that part of the decision to go ahead at this point and get this done? Explain why.
No. The Republicans will never fail to have their xenophobic motions to recommit, as they did last week. It doesn't matter whether we have a resolution or not. So this has nothing to do with that. This has to do with I see everything as an opportunity. This is an opportunity once again to declare strongest possible opposition to anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim statements, anti-white supremacist attitudes, where the president may think they're good people on both sides. We don't share that view. So it has nothing to do with that. However, I do grant you that the Republicans will try to put these kinds of statements in their motions to recommit. But that's housekeeping. That's not policy making. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Obviously, Leader McConnell is very opposed to H.R. 1. Yesterday, he said, I believe we can actually win elections against people who vote for this. Do you think H.R. 1 puts any pressure on some of your members in purple districts?
No. In fact, many of the members in the purple districts are the ones who are the strongest proponents for H.R. 1, so I appreciate your question. Who is... what the senator is saying, and with all the respect in the world for his leadership role, he has also said the problem is not that there's too much money in politics, Mitch McConnell said, it's that there's not enough money in politics. Well, we vehemently, completely, thoroughly disagree. But it's about money in politics and what how that destroys the confidence people have in the political process, but also it's about voter suppression. And so whatever they say, what they are voting, when they say they're against H.R. 1, they are against removing obstacles of participation to voting in our country. How do you explain that to our founders? I did everything in my power, founders, to make sure that people did not have access to the polling place, those who were eligible to vote, and to be sure that they could vote and that their vote would be counted as cast. I don't know if you were here when I announced my Too Hot to Handle Club. I think it was last week. We just have to make some of these issues too hot to handle in the public. The shutdown of government was too hot to handle. When we long ago passed the Violence Against Women Act, which is coming up again, we made it too hot to handle because the Republicans would not bring it up in the House. So along the way, the public weighing in on this, overwhelmingly the public supports removing voter suppression, lowering the role of big, dark, special interest money in politics, and again, respecting the rights of those who are eligible to vote and have it be counted as cast. Thank you.
Speaker, the House launched investigations on Trump. What kind of evidence does the House right now have on Trump to launch all these investigations on him? And couldn't this possibly be an overreach and essentially...
No, this is our constitutional responsibility to have oversight over the executive branch. And the evidence that they will have is what they will gather doing the oversight, bringing truth to the American people. I salute the committee for the action that they have taken. If we were not to exercise oversight over the executive branch, we would be delinquent in our duties.
Speaker. We're currently operating under extraordinary measures because we've reached the deadline for the debt limit. What's the current plan to either raise or extend the debt limit? And are these conversations?
We have a few more days for that, don't we? Isn't it?
We're working under extraordinary measures right now.
Well, according to the Secretary of the Treasury, those extraordinary measures will go until September or October. Let us hope that long before that we will have lifted. But that's it. It doesn't mean it isn't urgent. It just means that we have to address it. Everything is urgent here, right? This is urgent, but everything is also an opportunity to have a giant civics lesson for America as to what the role is of government, of each of the branches of government, and the extraordinary nature of the president usurping the constitutional powers of the legislative branch, Article 1, immediately following the preamble. And that's why we were so pleased that we were able to succeed in passing that legislation. Oh, did I mention that? Under the leadership of Joaquin Castro. And now it's in the Senate, where the senators are asking the president to withdraw his extraordinary usurpation of the Constitution of the United States. Thank you very much.
All right, listening right there to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi at the very top and in detail addressing this issue of anti-Semitism, remarks made by another Democratic member of Congress, Ilhan Omar, and the resolution that will be voted on in the House. Let me bring back in Dana Bash for a little bit on this. So Nancy Pelosi fleshing out what is going to happen somewhat, Dana, which is it's going to be a resolution taking on condemning anti-Semitism, anti-Islamophobia, and white supremacy as well. But where does that leave us?
It leaves the Democratic leadership in a safer position, it sounds like, than they were headed towards before what our team on Capitol Hill, Sunless Sarfati and others, reported was a really tense meeting, internal Democratic meeting yesterday about this very issue. Because the intention initially was to condemn anti-Semitism, and you just heard Nancy Pelosi talk about the fact that this is a growing problem again in Europe. She heard it in Europe and of course in this country as well. And so that was the initial intention, and it did not by coincidence, let's just call it what it is not a coincidence, came up after this whole controversy with Congresswoman Omar sending out tweets and making other statements that were perceived as anti-Semitic. Now, first, just on her, I thought it was noteworthy that Nancy Pelosi gave her a little bit of a pass, but also made clear that she needs to understand that she's a member of Congress now, relating Omar's experience to her own as an activist who can say whatever you want, but then when you come into Congress, you have to be more careful with your words. That was very noteworthy. But also the fact that there has been a lot of backlash within her now expanded caucus from people who are new, from people who are not just of color, but people who are worried about condemning Omar versus some of the others, old guards, some people who are Jewish, some people who are just, offended by Omar's comments, who say, no, she should be more directly condemned. So she's trying to make this resolution written in a way that is kind of an overreaching overall umbrella to make everybody in her very wide, very diverse caucus happy.
And will they be happy? That Nancy Pelosi definitely can't answer.
That's a hard thing to do.
That is a hard thing to do. And what the impact then of this resolution is in the many machinations that it's now taken, that's an interesting question.
And can I just throw one other quick thing in there? And that is that the other part of the politics of this is the Democrats are rushing to try to get this done today because Republicans smell blood in the water, political blood in the water. They were coming up with their own resolution to try to, put Democrats in a bind.
They can use procedures in the House by then bringing up the resolution tomorrow. Yeah.
Bingo.
So it was, yes, politics at play, at least in part. Thanks, Dana. Good to see you.
Thanks,
All right,
Kate.
Coming up, as Democrats are preparing to vote on this resolution now, condemning hate speech, is that going to be enough for the head of the Anti-Defamation League? Because he is not mincing words this morning. He will be joining us next. Plus, it is one of the central questions of President Trump's immigration policy. Why doesn't the Secretary of Homeland Security know how many migrant children are in government custody? How many have been separated from their families? Stay with us.
Beauty school dropouts, no graduation day.
T-Mobile will do the math for you. Right now, when you join T-Mobile, you get 2 lines of unlimited with 2 of the latest phones included for just $100 a month.
So when the Secretary of Homeland Security testified before Congress yesterday, she said this about a central question of how many migrant children have been separated from their families at the border. Listen.
Do you have a census of all of the children that are being detained in the various facilities, both the ones at the border and others that are in partnership with HHS? Do you know how many young people are detained?
Yes, ma'am. I don't have that number in front of me. We have all of the numbers.
Would you provide that for me?
Yes.
She doesn't have all of the numbers before her. She doesn't know offhand. It's not at her fingertips. Remember, this all started back in April of 2018. And the summer of 2018, a federal judge ordered that the administration reunite all of these children with their families. Yet in March of 2019, the Secretary of Homeland Security cannot say, won't say, doesn't have the numbers at her fingertips of how many children we are talking about right now. Every one, more or less, matters. That goes without saying because every single one is a child. But we do have one number this morning. Court documents show that 471 parents were deported from the U.S. without their children. Were they all given the option to bring their children with them? That seems to be up for debate. Here's what the Homeland Security Secretary says about that.
There was no parent who has been deported, to my knowledge, without multiple opportunities to take their children with them.
What is the truth right now? What are the numbers? Joining me right now is a lead attorney for the lawsuit where much of this information is coming to light, Lee Gallant. He's a deputy director of the ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project. Lee, when you hear, I want to start with the number that she could not offer.
Right.
The secretary did not offer in the hearing. It gets to the central question, which I have been asking you over and over again, is do we know how many children have been held? Does it surprise you when asked currently in custody, currently are being held, she didn't have it?
Yeah, you know, nothing anymore surprises me about this case. We do not know how many children were separated any longer. I naively thought we were getting to a point where we knew the population of children separated, and it was roughly 2,800, because that's what the government was telling us. So the government was telling the court. It turns out through a watchdog report that there may be thousands of additional separations, families separated. We don't know where they are. We don't know where the children are. The government says we can't track them because we don't have a database to track them. It would be too burdensome to go through the files. We are now back in court.
How is it a burden?
The government says it would be a burden to go through the individual files to try and put the parents and children back together. And what we've said is no burden is too great if there's little children who could be permanently orphaned. We're waiting for a ruling from the judge. Hopefully the judge is going to say you need to account for these children. I thought we were coming to the end when I've been back with you. I've said, you know, I'm hopeful.
Every time I ask you if you're hopeful.
Right. And now I think I was naive about it.
At its core, as you have been, and you have said, you believe that the government attorneys that you have been across the aisle from, that they had been working in good faith. In all of your good faith communications in court, do Do they say why there is no accounting? Why they don't know? I mean, it was pulling teeth to get the 3,000 children accounted for. What happened? How broken was the system? The system?
The system is broken. I mean, putting aside the government attorneys who may or may not have known everything from the agencies,
right.
The agencies had to know that there were all these families. They're now taking a position in court, well, these families were separated and the children released before the court order, so be it. But the point is that they're children who may not be with their parents. I mean, the government's artificial legal arguments.
Well, just an argument that it's just too much to handle is,
right.
is.
They do not want to go through the files. Well, first of all, they shouldn't be making that argument because they should have had a tracking system. I mean, why are they now saying, look, it's too much burden? They created the burden by taking the children away and not having a tracking system. And now they're saying it's too much burden on us.
So the 471 parents being deported without their children, the secretary says that in every case, they were given multiple opportunities to take their children with them, give them the option.
Not true.
How is that not true?
The families were deported and they had no idea of what they were signing. Many of them thought their children would actually be on the plane with them. The plane takes off.
You know this because you were actually speaking to these parents.
Right. We are the lawyers in the case. Some thought, well, as soon as I land, my child will be there at the airport. No. And so they're in Central America without their children. I just came back from Tijuana speaking to a 10-year-old boy and the father. They came in together, they separated the 10-year-old boy, didn't even let him hug his father goodbye. They sent the child to New York on his first plane ride. The father then had to call him in New York and say, son, I've been deported without you.
And the father says he was not given the option to reunite with his son.
He thought his son was going to be with him. They told him his son would be removed with you. He gets to his home country. His son is not there.
I'm sorry, Lee, is there a way that the Secretary of Homeland Security was technically accurate in what she said then before Congress, or did she mislead Congress?
Well, I think what she said is to her knowledge. I think, ultimately we're going to have to find out what was making its way up the chain. But if she didn't know, she should have known all this. I mean, the government's position is, oh, we gave everyone clear rules. They clearly did not give everyone a clear understanding of what was happening.
Some parents have, and we've talked about this, some parents did opt to have their children stay here, and they were deported. That does sound incredibly harsh. Why have those parents chosen that?
So let me just separate out two stages.
Yes.
The first stage, when they weren't counseled, we don't know what they thought was happening.
Exactly.
We then got involved and contacted every single family and asked them, here are your options. And some of them made the agonizing decision to leave their child in the U.S. when we told them we couldn't necessarily get them back in the U.S. And the reason they did it is the kind of decision every immigrant family has to make at some point along historically is it was too dangerous to bring the child back. I mean, the parents said to me, look, if I'm killed, but I cannot bring my child back here. And so that's the kind of agonizing decision our government forced on these families.
This is unbelievable. It requires a lot more answers now.
Yes.
On the 471, were they given the option? All of them given the real option, as the secretary says. And how many children are actually still separated, have been separated from their families? When this started in April, we still have no real accounting.
And the number just keeps going up. We thought we were at 2,800. We may be looking at another couple of thousand.
And the court is considering this now. Please come back in. We've got much more to discuss.
Absolutely.
Lee, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We'll be right back. He is one of the most iconic TV game show hosts, really, ever. He is an institution. Jeopardy host Alex Trebek, and he is now in the fight of his life, revealing devastating news in a video to fans that he's been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Watch this.
I'm going to fight this, and I'm going to keep working, and with the love and support of my family and friends, and with the help of your prayers also, I plan to beat the low survival rate statistics for this disease. Truth told, I have to, because under the terms of my contract, I have to host Jeopardy for 3 more years.
Levity in a moment of deadly serious. Joining me right now is Dr. Diane Simeone. She's the director of the Pancreatic Cancer Center at NYU Langone. It's great to see you, Diane. Thank you for being here. I really, really appreciate it. Stage 4, late diagnosis. Why is it so hard to detect this?
So pancreatic cancer is really a tough one. Over half of patients that come for the first time to the clinic have what we call stage 4 metastatic pancreatic cancer. And what that means is the cancer has spread beyond the pancreas to other organs, and it's not really amenable to surgical resection, which currently is the only way to cure the disease.
And why is it so deadly? I know these are so basic questions, and full disclosure, my family has been hit by pancreatic cancer, and this is something we care deeply about. Why is it so deadly?
It has a very unique biology that's different from other cancers. It spreads very, very early. We're still trying to understand what are the signals that drive that very early spread of the disease. And beyond that, it's very difficult to treat with the standard tools that we have, which are combination chemotherapy and radiation.
And so what is, with someone with stage 4, what does the fight look like, the treatment look like at that point?
So if you take all patients with pancreatic cancer, the overall 5-year survival rate currently is 9%. And it's for most patients with metastatic disease that we offer combination chemotherapy, we can increase survival in the order of months, unfortunately not years. However, we are learning more about pancreatic cancer, and we know that when we do genomic analysis of pancreatic cancers, that there are some pancreatic cancers that are actually different. About 40% that we find have unique signatures that may be much more amenable to different therapies, and those therapies can be much more successful.
This is your work, this is your passion, this is your life's work. Where are you in the spectrum of hopeful, of turning the tide when it comes to earlier detection and treatment that you've been working on?
So I think there are two big fronts that are happening that are going to change the course of the disease. The first is we have a whole new effort on redesigning how we do clinical trials for pancreatic cancer. It's called Precision Promise. It's an adaptive clinical trial platform that will allow us to get much more effective therapies to patients. It's going to be launching in about 2 to 3 months. So patients should stay tuned for that. That's particularly geared for patients with metastatic disease. The second is early detection. We have an increasing appreciation that there's a genetic component of this disease. So anyone who has a family history of pancreas cancer, has a lot of breast cancer in their family. There can be links with pancreatic cancer and melanoma, colon cancer. It's important for physicians to get a thorough family history and for patients not to be afraid if they have a family history of pancreatic cancer to seek counsel and help.
And be aggressive about it.
And be aggressive.
And about it.
And the other thing is there's a lot of nihilism about pancreatic cancer where it's thought that screening is not helpful, and that is not true. New data shows for patients who get screened are at increased risk. The likelihood that if we find something that we can resect it surgically and give patients a chance for cure is 90%, as opposed to the average patient who comes in the door, 15%.
And the cruel reality of this whole thing is that there aren't a lot of champions to fight against pancreatic cancer because there aren't a lot of survivors.
Correct.
And that is what is so troubling about it and why it's so important that you're here. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Coming up for us, moments ago, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that she doesn't believe that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar was being anti-Semitic with her controversial comments on Israel. She doesn't believe that she harbors anti-Semitic views, is how Nancy Pelosi was really putting it. What does the head of the Anti-Defamation League say about this resolution, about Nancy Pelosi's comments, and Ilhan Omar? He's going to join me next.